Okay, so second tutorial, time to go. So in this one, what we're going to do is talk about a couple of new things. We're going to look at how we can add and use a parameter, and then also deal with value fields. So in previous tutorial, we dealt with an identifier field, which is a string type, value fields in this one, which are numeric types. So the first thing we need to do, if you've been following along, is we're going to add another folder to our data flows field setup, tutorial 2. And in this one, we need to create a numeric type, and we're just going to call this one, for the purpose of simplicity, we're going to call it size. And we'll set aggregation to, I don't know, sum or something, just so that we can see it from a higher level. We might want to set it to average or something like that, doesn't really matter. So we've set a size, and we're just going to write a different number to the table depending on what range we're in. So if we're in the default, we're just going to write 1. If we're in a special range, we're going to write the number 2. It's very basic, once again, just to sort of show you how the mechanics of all of this works. So in the parameters side of things, we're going to create a new parameter, and we'll call this one tutorial 2. And we're going to go into its settings, and we're going to add a couple of things. So the first thing we want to do is change the matching mode to last. That allows us to have more than one parameter that meets a criteria, but we'll just pick whichever one is the last in the list. It just means that you can have sort of a default at the top and overrides working your way down. If you want to make sure there's no overlaps, you can go error when 2 or more rows matched. And we're going to add what's called a range key. So this is just a way of making sure that that we're looking up a unit based on its range, based on its input node normally. And in the attributes side, we're going to create a double type attribute. Same, it's very similar to creating it on the table. I'm going to call this one size to match what we're going to have on the table there. So that side of things is done. If you want to change format strings or the way other things appear, you can do so in here. But for the moment, I'm done. And in the actual parameters, I'm going to add 2 new parameters. I'm going to create one here. I need to unlock my parameters so I don't accidentally change them. I'm going to hit unlock. In the description here, I'm going to put default. And in the range, I'm going to put an asterisk. You can also use your all range if you want. And in the size, I'm going to put 1. And then in the description of the second one, I'm just going to put alternative override. Something like that is fine. And then in the range, I'm going to put a sub-range of my data. Now in this particular model, I'm going to use strip 1 of the alpha pit, but if you're using your own model, as long as it's a sub-range to make sure that it works. And then in the range, for my inline range, I'm going to put that, and then I'll put the size of 2. So if I'm in everywhere or anywhere, I can grab 1. If I'm specifically in strip 1, I'm going to get the number 2 because the parameter is set up to match the last thing in the list. Okay. So that's the parameter setup. Now it doesn't do anything on its own, obviously. We need to hook it up to a data flow somehow. So I'm going to go across to my data flows, and rather than go through the process of creating everything all over again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to insert a copy of my previous data flow. It just means that I hold on to some of the setup that I've already gone through. So the grouping expression, the ranges, the fields. We need to do a couple of extra things here with this data flow. We want to change what it wipes. So it's going to remove the reference, or it's going to delete the values in the size record. And in the value fields, I'm going to add, very exciting, size. So this is where we're going to store the size for each unit. Aggregation, for the purposes of this, let's set 1, but it's not super important for this round. Set 1 to sum. And then from here, hit close. I'm going to call this one tutorial 2. In the processing block, we've got this write message. So I'm going to disable this one. It's there, but I'm not going to use it. And instead, I'm going to create a new snippet. I'm going to call this one determine size. By default, just returning units, which just means bring units in, pull units out, do nothing with them. But in this one, what I want to do is I need to do two things. I need to check the parameter, so I need to try and read the size off the parameter. And then what I want to do once I've got a parameter is I want to write the parameter to the unit's size. So the first thing I need to do is I'm still going to iterate over each of the units. So what I mean by that is I need to go across for each unit in units. You're going to see that a lot. So for every unit, I need to, firstly, I need to look up its record. So there's a little bit of extra code in here. We just need to make sure that every unit has an input node. Now this is, for this tutorial, it's not super important, but it's a really good practice to get into, is to check that the node that you're going to look up actually exists, right? So what I mean by that is if the input node is null, which is what this check is for, I hope if I could get that around the right way, is we're just going to skip it. So there are examples where units get created from scratch there. So we're just going to do a quick sanity check and say, is the input node there? Because otherwise things can complain when the programming, when the coding gets compiled. So the next thing we're going to do is say, okay, well, we've got an input node. So what we're going to do is say parameter entry, and we're going to look up the parameters. And the way we do this is we go parameters dot, and we should be getting, but I may need to hit recalculate. So let's just comment that out for a moment. Hit recalculate, uncomment it. We need something to tell the compiler that the parameter is now there. Parameters dot. Oh, that's not a good start. What I should be seeing here is my list of parameters. Now we've just gone through an update to the code, so it doesn't surprise me that some of this information is missing, but yeah, I'll need to chase that up. I'll try closing it and reopening it, although I don't think that will be enough. What I should be seeing, if you follow the instructions exactly, it should come straight across. But yeah, what I should be seeing is a prompt to allow me to type in tutorial2 and then get parameter. And then I'll put the input node in here. So probably it's yet another example of where things change ever so slightly. But yeah, so assuming that that will get fixed, what you would normally expect to see when you type parameters in here, and you can see that it starts to try and fill it out for you. Parameters dot, yeah, it's not giving me the information that I wanted. It should tell you which parameters you have available to you. So we'll get that addressed. But for the time being, that is the syntax. So to read a parameters is firstly go to parameters and then the code name, which is generally the name of the parameter without any spaces in it. Capitalization is important. So if you use capitals on your tutorial and 2, then you need capitals in the code. And then get parameter, and then for this purpose, we're looking up the input node. So it seems like a lot, but for the purposes of the universality, the flexibility of the system, it's a little bit of extra setup. But once we've got that, we've now got the parameter entry, and the parameter entry will have on it the size. So we can now read that size, and we can write that to the unit. Now there is a possibility that your parameter does not exist, so that the entry that you're looking for, so each of these lines is what we call an entry. Each of these entries, that it's possible that your lookup fails. It doesn't. There's nothing in this range that has anything on it. So the first check we do is the parameter entry null? So if it's null, which is very similar to what we wrote up here, we're just going to move on as well. So for the time being, if there's no parameter, we're going to move on. We're going to address this later on. We're going to do things a different way, but for the time being, we're going to skip it. So at this point in the loop, we know that we've got a parameter, which means we can now write the unit's size. So we can say unit.Size, and it just looks like, in general, my path completion is struggling a little bit, but I should just be able to type in unit.Size. And then I'm going to go parameterEntry.Size. So that there is the code that we need to read the parameter entry. And if we hit recalculate, and if you remember from the last tutorial, we may need to go to the column chooser to grab the size, is because the group that we're in is an alpha strip 1, which is part of the range that has a alternate size, you can see that the number 2 has been written to each of the units in this block. What we could do is we could pick a subset of that. We could say strip 1, block 1, D145. So if we go into the parameter, we could go a third one, unlock it, go alpha, strip 1, block 1, D135, I think, 145, something like that. Doesn't really matter, you'll see it. We'll just write 999 to it. And back to the data flow, hit recalculate, and you can see the recalculations picked up a different parameter, but only for that one record. So if we flick through different groups that aren't in alpha strip 1, you'll see that the size is 1. So we're going to talk a little bit more about grouping and things like that. For the time being, you should be seeing, if you've set it up this way, the various sizes coming through depending on which parameter has been picked. So that's the main chunk of this tutorial. The final part that we need to do is we need to set the output block to write the size back to the table, and this is not really anything new. We're going to go and find the size. We're going to take the value, not the field. We're going to take the value, so it'll be called unit size, which is exactly the same as the terminology before. The difference being is that size is a value field, and because we're writing it back to a double, then we're not being asked to convert it. Same with the message. Now if we tried to write the message to this one, we would get a complaint that the message is not a number, which is the reason why we can just write unit size, because unit size is a number and size itself is a number. And then we rerun the data flow and head back to the table, and what we'll find now is field statistics. We've got most of these numbers. We've got the 999 is not a good one for the go interval of 1. Oh, it's not going to let me increase my interval. Anyway, we've got a series of numbers in 2s and most of them being in 1s, etc. So that's the process. There's a couple of little things to fix with the Intellisense there, which I'm going to go do now, but the process of reading from a parameter and writing it back to the table with the data flow, that's it. If you got stuck with that, if the code didn't work, if you're not sure on what's next, so just keep following through with the tutorials, and if you have any questions about it, let us know.